everyone, and welcome to The Journey. This is Julieann Hartman, and I have a special guest that you're already seeing on the show. This is my friend, Kevin Chapman. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Julieann. It's good to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. And now, guys, this is not going to be a normal show of just hearing the testimony of something that might have happened to Kevin personally, but you're going to hear many testimonies of people that have been freed from anxiety, from fear, from disorders, from phobias, and anything that's related to fear and entrapment and bondage. This is what Kevin does for a living. This is what Kevin does for the body of Christ. And you need to stay tuned on every single episode because this is something that I am so excited to bring everybody. You know, Kevin, my whole life, it's like, I always want to see people free from stuff, whatever it is. And I know that today with this interview, they're going to see where the entrapment is, why it happened, how it happened, whatever, but get rid of it. So, all right, Kevin, so let's start here. What is the name of your company? What do you do?
Yeah, so I appreciate it, Julieann. So I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, right? And I specialize in all things anxiety is the best way to describe it. So my company, our center is called the Kentucky Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders. We're a regional clinic for the National Social Anxiety Center. So we're a nationally recognized entity, actually. So we specialize in time-limited treatment for anybody who has any sort of anxiety disorder, including like phobias, OCD, panic attacks, agoraphobia, specific phobias, social anxiety, worry. Everything under that umbrella is what we specialize in.
Wow. Okay. So you get everyone. You're not just getting Christians, you're getting everyone that is experiencing anxiety. So what, oh my gosh, I know that your therapies are very, I might just say radical at times. And, but think about how radical in a negative way that this anxiety is coming into people's lives and completely destroying them. And I mean, destroying them because they're limited in their life. And I know I had it. I wish I would have had you in my life at the time. I do and I don't, because you know what? Me and the Lord had to walk through it. And so it might have taken a little longer, but our relationship grew as a result. So Kevin, give me an example of someone that would come to you with an extreme, you know, anxiety situation, or well, actually, let's do this. Let's do a phobia first. Like, let's say, like, what has been the worst phobia that you've ever experienced that someone has come to you about?
You know, I'd say worst phobia, probably most bizarre phobia, right? Like I get people who come to see me with a phobia, it has to be debilitating, right, Julieann? Because ultimately, most people who have a phobia can avoid many of the things they're concerned about, right? If you're afraid of dogs, well, just put the dog away, right? Like if you're afraid of, you know, storms, go hide in a storm shelter and things like that. But when people see me for a phobia, it tends to be absolutely impairing to all facets of their life, right? So for example, you know, I've seen someone who's come in with a phobia of ranch dressing, right? I've had someone with a phobia of soup, of someone with a phobia of vomiting. We call that a metaphobia, or fear of throwing up, right? So I've had people in those categories with absolutely debilitating phobias. I had a guy, there's probably the worst one, who had a special needs child, actually, who could never go into the room with his kid who needed all these surgeries and medical attention and whatnot, because he had a phobia of needles. He couldn't even touch his own veins, Julieann, like not even his own arm. So his kid would go in there and cry and have all this distress when he's at a hospital, and his dad, who he looked to as a rock, he could not actually go in the room with him. So that's probably the worst.
Okay, you have to go back to the ranch dressing, because I just, seriously, is it because it's related to a traumatic experience?
So it's interesting, Julieann, because we're getting into the meat now, right? So when you think about how a phobia might develop, I mean, there's a number of different associations that take place. We have people who have what's called a traumatic experience, like you said. So they have like this direct experience where they had the fear response, or say a panic attack in the context of that thing. So in this case, It's this idea. Here's how the story goes. He was a kid. He was like 30 now, but he was a child. He remembers washing dishes with his mom. They were joking, laughing, playing music, having a good time and whatnot. And he remembers washing dishes and getting a whiff of something that just smelled so incredibly pungent to him. He's like, what is that? And mom's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And all of a sudden he realized what it was. It was ranch dressing. And he literally had this big, strong visceral reaction in his body. So his mom took him naturally to all these allergists, all these physicians. They were like, I don't know what's wrong with him. There's no allergies. He's fine. And he literally could not, from that point forward, be around ranch, smell ranch, go to Super Bowl parties, which is really tragic to me, going to all these other places, couldn't do anything if there was the association of ranch. Restaurants couldn't go. Why? They have ranch on the menu, right? So literally, not that he had a direct experience with ranch per se, but he simply had that predisposition to experiencing fear strongly in that case. And it happened in the context of ranch. He didn't like the smell of it, and boom, literally debilitated the rest of his life until he got treatment, of course.
Wow. All right. Well, it's interesting that you say that. And after I said that to you, I was like, well, wait a minute. I know someone that cannot eat certain crackers or onions because it reminds them of the smell of the person that was eating that was abusing them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, okay. So that totally makes sense. So, I like to bring these stories and this stuff to our viewers because I know for a fact that probably 90% of our viewers on Healing Journeys today, our whole platform, that there is a element of fear that has brought on the sickness and disease. Yep. I know it. I can guarantee you that's what happened to me. So that's what I think is what is the core of autoimmune disorders, is usually some kind of a fear that has some kind of a traumatic experience. So what do you do in a case of the man with ranch dressing? What did you do? This is so interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting, Julieann. You mentioned kind of radical treatment. So the gold standard treatment, which of course is supported by the word, is what we call exposure therapy. And exposure therapy essentially means you confront the thing that you're afraid of, the object or the situation, whether it be the sensations in your body, the context in which it occurs, the person, the situation, the expressway, the ranch dressing. You do that enough times so that your brain learns that it's not in fact threatening. So are you saying that you have to be uncomfortable to get over this? Absolutely. Freedom comes from the confronting of the distress that you have. Everyone tells these folks, Julieann, oh, well, if you're afraid of that, just stay away from it. Right. Oh, take these 2 pills and you'll be fine, right? And we all know that's not true, because although that's a Band-Aid and a buffer for that distress that person has, the gold standard to get over fear and anxiety is absolutely confronting it. So your brain can say, actually that negative outcome didn't happen this time. I can have my heart race a little bit and not freak out or have a panic attack. Or I can be in that situation and actually have a good experience. So when you do that enough time, God designed our brains that way for us to say, wait a second, this situation is not threatening and dangerous. I just learned to view it that way.
Wow. Okay. So how would you work with this gentleman? Can you give us like a little bit of a play-by-play of what that would look like?
That's a great point. So basically what would happen in the case of a phobia, so let's say in the case of the ranch dressing, what you would do is you kind of get a snapshot of essentially where it came from. So like I mentioned earlier, we know there's 3 pathways that fear ultimately develops, at least in the natural. And here's how that goes. Number 1, we have direct experience with the situation. So we might have had a traumatic event occur. Maybe I was sick that day when I encountered that situation, right? Maybe I had strong adrenaline in my body and was stressed out. We also have what's called observational learning, Julieann. And that's when parents, another show, but where parents model fear for the individual, because we know there's a family transmission of fear and anxiety because parents often model how to respond negatively in situations. So observational learning or modeling.
Okay, so that's what I say this all the time, and it's like I've needed someone to back me up. It's learned behavior.
Absolutely learn by
Okay,
hearing.
so all of this generational curse crap that I can't stand to hear, it's like, no, you can stop it because I stopped it. Butch,
Yep.
my husband, stopped it. But
Yep.
it's familiar behavior. It's what you have saw, and now you're repeating, you're demonstrating. Oh God, I'm so excited right now.
No,
So go
we're on
on.
the same page, Julieann. And I could match your energy and go on a tangent with that too. And I might, right? But let me say the third thing. The third thing is what we call informational transmission. So for some people who are predisposed at times, and I'll explain what I mean by predisposed in a minute, because I think we're on the same page, is that simply hearing about someone having a negative experience in a context like, oh, did you see that airplane? Did you hear about what happened to so-and-so, right? Like, if somebody has a stressful reaction in their body in the context of simply hearing that, those three different pathways can interact and create, what we know is this phobia, so to speak. So when that happens, we educate, right? Knowledge and understanding are so important for when you're dealing with a phobia, right? So educating the client on that and teaching them to be their own psychologist, if you will. Once we do that, then we make a list of situations. So with the ranch dressing, it would be making a list of things that would be really, really, really uncomfortable for that client so that we can teach them that even if I were to douse my face in ranch, that a negative outcome wouldn't occur. So basically what we would do is construct a list, starting with standing maybe 6 feet away from a bowl of ranch, which, believe it or not, was very uncomfortable for that person. And then we would approach holding a bowl of ranch, then maybe smelling it, taking a finger, tasting it, ultimately eating it on 3 chicken strips, which actually, in fact, happened, but then washing a sink full of a vat of ranch. And I do mean like a vat of ranch until you're doused in it, you smell it, you see it, you taste it until that distress goes away.
Oh my gosh, I'm like speechless.
It works.
That reminds me of something. So let me ask you a question about this. This is a personal thing. So many years ago, actually, when the one of the Gulf War broke out, my brother-in-law at the time was sent in as a Marine on the front line, and my husband and I were at my apartment, and I was washing a glass. Now we're watching what was happening on the TV, and it was like already I was like a little stressed out because seeing what was happening. And I have this glass and I'm washing it like this, and I pushed too hard and I broke the glass and I cut my finger. And because I had the water on and the sink was filled with water, the whole thing filled with red water, which was blood. And I passed out.
Yep.
We had to call the paramedics.
Literally, it describes a learned association. You can literally be afraid or develop a fear of anything, Julieann. Like the editor of the New Yorker, I did an article with her, and she had a phobia of cotton balls. I mean, it really does not make any difference, like what the situation or the context is. Basically, anything that you encounter and you have a learned association and a physiological response with can develop, if you allow it to, into a phobia, which is primarily learned.
This also is something I'm being selfish. I'm asking questions for myself right now. But like, for instance, my father was an alcoholic. I dated every alcoholic and drug addict possible. But when I met my husband, he was none of that. But when he would occasionally have a few drinks, I couldn't deal with it. If he had a glass of wine, I was like, my mind went right back into this is going to happen and that's going to happen and all those things. And it was a struggle for many, many years. So is that the same kind of like a visceral kind of a reaction?
Julieann,
because it comes from the brain?
100%. And not to get too nerdy, but basically what happens is we have a portion of our brain called the limbic system. And you've probably heard of the amygdala, right? The amygdala, that fear center and stuff. We also have what's called the hippocampus, which is where your memories are stored. We have the hypothalamus, which kind of is a relay center, so to speak. And what happens when we have traumatic events happen to us, whether it be abuse, whether it be a bad report, whether it be sickness, whatever it may be, a panic attack, that limbic system is activated, sending not only all of that, adrenaline and such to your body to help you fight off stress, makes your heart race, makes your stomach distress, and all of those sort of symptoms. What happens though in the hippocampus part of your brain, the memory part, is it's a learned memory association. So in other words, in the future, all it requires is you encountering something that reminds you, right?
Okay.
Reminds you of the event. And that limbic system says, you remember that? Boom. And then you're flooded again with all of that stress. So that what used to be very normal and safe now all of a sudden takes on a new meaning because I associate all of that distress in my body from the past with that in the future. That's literally what happens.
So Kevin, why did you get into this business? Like, did you have any kind of anxiety disorder or anything like that?
Yeah, so no, I wouldn't say I had an anxiety disorder, but I will say this. The third most common mental health condition in the world, Julieann, believe it or not, is social anxiety disorder, because we all experience social anxiety to some degree, right? It's pretty normal to say, oh, well, what if I screw this up in the speech that I have coming up? What if they make fun of me? So I definitely had that sort of anxiety for sure. But I was an athlete in college. I played football and ran track in college. And then I majored in psychology. And when I took my first psych course, I was like, I like the challenge. And what I heard in my psych course was the following. 40 million people a year in the United States are diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. Only 1/3 of them receive treatment. And yet they're very treatable. I said, that doesn't sit right with me. So ultimately through exploring that, ultimately through thinking back to like childhood friends, my own parents who had huge fears of things like dogs and water and swimming pools. I was like, why are they so afraid of those things? And then that kind of hit me in that moment, that's how fear and phobias develop. My mom used to tell me, Julieann, boy, put a coat on or you're going to get pneumonia. And I'm like, that's not how you get pneumonia. But growing up thinking those sort of things, I'm like, this makes sense why people develop fear and phobias of various things. So I became intrigued by that. And from that point forward, I'm like, sign me up, because it's something that's pretty simple to treat, honestly, yet most people need it and most people don't get it. So I saw it as a challenge. I saw it as an area where there's never a dull moment. And I saw it as a way that the Lord could use me to really help people navigate stress. So there we are.
Okay, so let's go back to the ranch dressing. So you get into, you give him the chicken strips and now you're having him eat the ranch dressing off or taking a bite of the chicken strip. How long did that process take for him to actually eat it and be free from it?
So get ready for this, Julieann, because the viewers, y'all watching, like this is incredible. And this is the power of what we're talking about. We did all of this in one day. And this is someone who had this fear their entire lives, Julieann. I told you this.
I was going to ask. Yeah.
He was 7 years old and he was 30 at the time. And then we did all of this in a matter of like 5 to 6 hours. An intensive treatment approach, teaching you the importance of, breathing skills, teaching you the importance of your thoughts leading to that distress in your body, teaching you the importance of confronting hell or high water. You need to do it anyway, even if your body tells you not to, because if you ride the wave, that distress always comes back down. So teaching concepts like that. And I'm telling you, not only did he do that, Julieann, he actually enjoyed the chicken strip. That's probably low key the best part.
Oh
so
my
it took
God.
Yeah, so he was ecstatic, as you can imagine. Ecstatic.
Okay, so another, I know just from, hearing the comments and talking to our viewers, which they are our family, and gosh, you are just unlocking so many lies and, oh, this is awesome. So a lot of people that have been sick are afraid of getting sick again. Like they've gotten their symptoms, like some of the symptoms have subsided. They're like moving on with their life, and all of a sudden, bam, they get hit. Now the whole process starts again, and they feel like, well, how many more times can I go through this? Meaning like they go away, now they come back and all that. What do you have to say about that?
Well, what I have to say about that is that, first of all, it's normal for you to get hit with those sort of thoughts and that flood of emotion anytime something like that happens. But I think this, Julieann, is where it's so incredibly powerful and important to identify the role that my thoughts play in contributing to that distress. Like, I can't say enough that, and even scripturally, the bottom line is that the battle is here. And we learn to think a certain way when it comes to sickness, when it comes to disease, when it comes to something. We say things to ourselves like, here we go again, or I just can't do this again. I can't tolerate it. And unfortunately, what happens when we say that is your body is a gentleman or a gentlewoman. It's going to respond to what you tell it. So when I make these comments and speak that over myself and say, oh, I can't do this, here we go again, my body's like, oh, so you're saying you're in danger. Therefore, let me remind you that you are when you're in fact not. So what I would say to that, Julieann, is that if we can capture the thoughts that we know are contributing to that distress that we have, whether it be a medical condition or whether it be psychological and emotional, that is the culprit, and that is something that we're designed to change. You literally can reprogram your brain and how you think about that. You know, it's interesting, Julieann, there's a theory called the gate control theory of pain. And what we know from research is that when people have negative thoughts about pain, they focus on the pain, they focus on how much it hurts, they focus on that, that actually has the gate open. In other words, all of that flow of pain is actually inside my body and it makes it more intense. But studies show that when I say things to myself that focuses on the solution, as opposed to the pain itself, that gate closes and the pain's way less intense.
Wow, you are just like, I am so excited because, you know, I mean, I'm not like educated in anything that you've been educated in. My education has been what I've experienced. Mm-hmm. And I know that I know certain things, and I try to explain and express it to people. And sometimes I'm just not effective. And you are answering every question. You are given the answer to all of this. And it's what was in my heart, but I just didn't know how to say it. And so you're telling me that your thoughts are a big problem.
Julieann, I'm telling you that your thoughts are the biggest problem. You know, secular or not, believer or non-believer, we know for a fact that if you change the way you think, it changes your emotional experiences. Your body will submit to what you tell it, right? Good or bad, right? So ultimately, your thinking is the biggest culprit. But here's the beauty of it, Julieann, just like we said with the learned associations, your thoughts also are learned and can be reprogrammed. So if you can identify, and that's one of the things we do, Julieann, is we teach clients, hey, listen, you're thinking, you need to identify the thoughts. Let's call out the lie. We call those thinking traps. We call out the lie that's in those thoughts, and then we counter it with truth or evidence-based thinking, and then we put it on, so to speak, and meditate on it and rehearse it. And literally the intensity of emotions goes down when I approach things that I never could approach in the past.
So what do you do about, let's say, somebody that is very ill, you know, let's say it's, I don't even know, some kind of a debilitating disease. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's like, well, that person was a believer, and that I know that person believed they were going to be healed, and they just didn't get healed. So this is how I feel. When you are faced with this kind of thing and you're seeing the evidence, right? Like you see maybe it's a tumor or something like that, and you're seeing the evidence, what is, like, just from what you know, what's the fight that really is going on? Because as Christians, we're going, well, I'm standing strong and I know that the word of God says this or that, but then they end up dying anyway, meaning that I really do believe that it has a lot to do with what is going on the inside of their heads, because Jesus is not a man that he would lie. God doesn't lie. His promises are true. So how are people dying that were believers? And then we have to go to the reason of, well, I guess they just really wanted to go to heaven, kind of a thing. What do you think about that?
Well, I guess my view in that situation, Julieann, is very similar to yours. I think in many ways we might believe and say and think that we're actually operating in faith and saying the right things, but are we really, though? Because oftentimes, you know, the word, it says be doers of the word, not hearers only. And I think in many ways, though, sometimes we believe and have convinced ourselves, right? The word tells us to not be deceived. Beloved brethren, don't be deceived, meaning you can be deceived.
Yes.
Right? So in many ways, I can think that I'm doing and saying the right things. But if I have an ounce of unbelief, an ounce of speaking something over, oh, here, well, yeah, my leg is just killing me. Like the things I hear people say literally are speaking these curses over themselves, and their body responds to it. just like their bodies will respond to what they speak life into, right? So in many ways, I think that it is a matter of taking inventory and saying, am I really submitting and taking every high thought captive? Am I really taking every single high thought captive? And are my actions reflecting what I'm saying I believe?
So how important is it to capture those thoughts? And what happens when I get this all the time? Will it the thought keeps coming over and over and over and over, and I can't shut it down? What advice would you give somebody?
So there's a number of different things I could say to that. I'll try to give you some sound bites with that, Julieann, but let me first address that. Number one, there's two ways many people try to respond to things like anxiety. All right. And neither are good, but here's what they are. I think you'll like this. There's what we call rumination, and there's what we call worry, what Jesus spoke against in Matthew 6. They're two sides of the same coin. Worry is what we define as repetitive negative thoughts about the future. Rumination is what we call repetitive negative thoughts about the past. Both of those are in response to strong emotions that give me an illusion of control, but backfires and doesn't resolve the problem to begin with. Hence why Jesus said what he said in Matthew 6, right? Like, do not worry. Here's why you should worry, right?
Why? Right.
So I say all that to say that overthinking, intrusive thoughts and things like that are a byproduct of how I've learned to respond to core emotions that are not meant to hurt me in any way. If I view negative emotions a certain way, Julieann, I'm going to try to do things to try to feel better that backfire and make me feel worse. So here's two strategies that I like to talk about. First and foremost, if I can, Psalm 16:11, it says, "You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy." I like to tell people who overthink, Julieann, it's awfully hard to be in God's presence if you're not present. So in many ways, we got to learn the skill of being present in our emotional awareness, turning things off and simply being mindful, paying attention to what the word says, paying attention to my own emotional experience, turning off the radio, turning off the sound, and practicing mindfulness strategies. The word tells us to do that, right? So being mindful, learning how to be present, that's one strategy. And then another strategy is actually countering those thoughts, right? Countering the images and the emotions associated with those thoughts. See, what happens when people worry, Julieann, is they're avoiding two things. They're avoiding the imagery associated with a bad outcome, and they're avoiding the emotion. Let me give you an example real quick if I can. So like, let's say somebody's worried about their child making it to school or something like that. Rather than picturing them, oh, they're dead and oh, it's so horrible, rather than picturing them being dead or something happening to them, what they do instead is they worry through checking bus routes, checking Life 360, checking to make sure that, so they're dancing around the main core of fear. And that is, what if something happened to my kid? So when you get them to confront that, those thoughts start to dissipate, even though it's uncomfortable, because guess what? They're protected, nothing actually happens to them. And therefore that's something that my brain stops doing when I do that.
Well, okay, so look at Mary. Mm-hmm. She got anxious when she couldn't find Jesus, right?
Yep. Good example.
So you can look at that as going, see, our moms have been cursed since the very beginning, right? Yep. No, we're not. We're going to trust God no matter what. He's got, yep. I always say this, hey, my girls are your girls first. And so, right? And I think that I should be more concerned about how I as a human raise them than how God protects them, right?
That's right. That's right. Yes. The perfect love takes out fear. And that's the big thing. If we remember that, then we can recognize that not only will he never leave us nor forsake us, but if we know that that perfect love casts out that fear that we have, we don't have to walk around dreading situations or things happening to our loved ones, knowing that God loves them more than we do.
Well, all right. So I know you're all going to get mad, but we got to stop. We're out of time already. So you need to come back tomorrow because it is going to, or not tomorrow, next week. See, I already think you're going to come back tomorrow because this is so exciting. But next week, this is awesome. You do not want to miss, because next week we're going to talk about anxiety. This week was about phobias. We're going to go to anxiety the next week. And this is, man, this is like it's like a plague that hits the body of Christ, not, yes, the world, but the body of Christ. And God told us specifically to be anxious for nothing. So we're going to talk to Kevin about that and find out, why did God say that? And why are we anxious for everything? Right? So thank you guys for watching. Please go to healingjourneystoday.com and check out everything there. We've got a newsletter. We have an amazing event, a live in-person event coming up that you don't want to miss. So go check out everything you can. And if you want to help us bring these shows forward, please donate on healingjourneystoday.com. Thank you so much. I love you, and I'll see you next week.